Mark from Narrow Target and United States Armory, here for Samson Project X. This is my review video for our first product, which Samson sent all of us, the 3.5 power magnifier with the RAM flip to side mount, as our first Project X review. I blogged a little bit about it on Tumblr and shared some pictures on Tumblr and Instagram, but I don't like to run through a review. I like to test them pretty thoroughly, play with it for a while, and make sure that it's not a momentary review, it's a long-term review, because you're going to own these things for a while. But let's take a look at what comes in the box. First, the box is awesome. It's plastic, foam lined, so the optic is shipped protected. You get a specification sheet, which is, it's not installation instructions, it's just specs. I think that mounting is pretty intuitive, but I'm mechanically inclined. You get a cleaning rag to clean the glass on the optic. You get the optic itself. You get the RAM base, the flip to side RAM base, which I think for the price point you cannot beat this. It's an incredibly versatile system. They make spacers and adapters and bases for almost every optic out there. And this flip to side mounts in and snaps open positively. The spring is perfect. It's positive enough to retain the optic where it's supposed to be. It doesn't flop, but it's not so stiff that you can't close it quickly. Then you got the RAM, which RAM stands for rotary actuated mount. It's not a cam. You actually twist a threaded rod into a nut, and then it's locked in position, has a spring-loaded retainer. So it has all the benefits of a cam without all the drawbacks. The other thing about the RAM is you'll see on this side you have a detent and this wheel. This allows you to customize the finished close side of the RAM to your rail. And where that's important is you get out of spec stuff. You'll see in my montage, I put it on a Turkish 410 upper, which is all sort of out of spec, with no problem at all. But if your rail is too small or too large, a cam lock will either mar the rail from overpressure, from you really forcing that cam closed, or your mount will be loose and sloppy on there because you go to a full throw on the cam and the cam isn't big enough to take up the out of spec size. In addition to the mount, you get a .262 riser to raise it up for high mount optics. You get long screws and short screws, and a thread locker, which is not red, it's perfect, it's blue. Now the screws, I think, for me, are the biggest sticking point. I like to see hex or Torx, but these are just standard slotted screws. Here's actually the short ones that I used during testing. Some of the other Project X members said they had a problem with marring the screws and getting them in. I didn't have that problem because I only used hollow ground screwdrivers, because that's the gunsmith's tool. Right tool, right job, right folks? Now the optic itself, I've never been a big magnifier guy. The Army doesn't use them. Some units buy them on their credit card and hand them out, but in the Army you have iron sights, you have your M68 or your ACOG for the M series of rifles, for M16s and M4s. So I'd always use the M68, which is the Aimpoint Comp M2 or Comp M4, depending upon when you're issued it. And if I needed to shoot far with accuracy, I'd switch to irons and shoot through the sight with my irons. Because a dot sight it's not really a sight as much as it's a point of impact reference. It's best used for quick shots or reflex shooting. But if you have a target at distance that's a small target, dots are not the best thing in the world. But in my testing of the Samson 3.5 power mag, I've kind of it's kind of converted me, especially when combined with a RAM mount. Because I put it behind an Aimpoint Comp M4 principally. I tested it behind other optics. I really feel like it's best behind an Aimpoint. But this optic it doesn't fit the mold of other magnifiers. This feels like an optic. It has some weight to it. It's rubber armored, it's zeroable with elevation and windage, has an adjustable diopter so you can set your own eye relief with it based on your cheek weld. You don't have to slide forward to use it. The mount is beefy. It just feels like an optic. And they've actually scaled this down. I tried to get Scott Samson's prototype magnifier from him, which was huge. It was massive. It was like on the order of like 68 or 75 millimeters, somewhere in there. And I tried to get that from him for 2 years, every time I saw him. And the same with the RAM mount. I tried to get prototypes from him to test them, but he wouldn't let them go until they were right. But this, for the price point, this combination, I mean, because there's lots of different mounts out there, but for the price point, I can't even fathom it. I mean, the quality of this mount, the way that it locks up, so you can see it's got multiple teeth that drive in and engage and lock in solid. And it's all quality manufactured. It's not China crap, and for the price point, you really can't beat it. I mean, you get this whole system for the cost of a LaRue mount for other optics. It's fantastic. I find that it greatly improves my ability to engage targets at small targets at longer distance. It improves my ability to identify it. Now, that being said, you're still just running a dot, so you've got to commit to memory what your bullet drop is and your point of impact at varying ranges. But like I said, I think it kind of converted me. So let me show you some of the other setups that I've got at my disposal that I compared against this, and we'll see how it goes. Alright, so testing the Samson magnifier. Since I do comparative studies, I've got 3 different setups going on. I've got my aim point with the Samson mag on my test bed gun, aim point pro with the aim point mag, poo dumps with poo dumps, and EOTech, and I'll flip the Samson mag behind it and play with it a little bit. So magnifier or no magnifier?
Magnifier's the bomb.
I gotta say though, much better behind an aim point. The EOTech's just kind of, I don't know, wishy-washy. But cool thing is, this RAM mount makes it really easy to switch between weapons. Just pop it off my kids and put it on this United States Armory machine gun here. It's a good time. I'm gonna see, I've got this Turkish-made 410 AR upper that is a little out of spec. But it's a little tight, but it snaps on. So nothing very glorious, because it's only 2.5 inch 410. Rory.
She don't hit the release on the side.
Picky.
She is.
But just do something different. I'll just blast this out with the RAM on open. Put you where you can see it. See how well this spring holds this this magnifier in place. It's not floppy, loosey-goosey. Okay, so these are the 3 rifles that I tested with magnifiers and reflexive sight combinations. As I stated before, it was never my thing. And when you use these systems, I think you would understand why in comparison to the Samson RAM setup. I get the primary arms magnifier with, I guess you could call it, what would you call this, slide to side? It's basically terrible. It's wobbly in place. It actually walks off to flip when you're shooting. Just all around a terrible setup. Then you have the more popular Aimpoint mag behind an Aimpoint Pro, using the Aimpoint twist-off mount, which I'm not a fan of. I mean, it's a good solid mount, but as far as functionality goes, well, this leads to this. You can see how dented up the diopter, or the objective is there. So it's solid, it's a good magnifier, but it's not user-friendly. It's not very conducive to keeping your magnifier when you're stressed out, easily lost, and that's not something you want on all the time. This is the ideal setup here, where you can flip it out of the way. It pops up into place when you don't need it. This system here has kind of won me over to the hybrid sight for rifle platform. Just all around a better system. The RAM is perfect. The magnifier is very well made, very useful. The one thing I can say is, in terms of quality, the Samson magnifier is on par, if not a little bit better than all the other examples here. I mean, the Aimpoint magnifier is made very well, but there's just something about the Samson magnifier that makes it feel more like a quality optic. The RAM mount, there's no comparison. The RAM mount is infinitely more useful, more user-friendly, and more versatile than any of the other examples that I had. With that being said, I want, pretty please, RAM flip-to-side ACOG, because this is my go-to rifle. It's got a lot of Samson on it. Evo rail, Samson QD, hand stop, iron sights. I don't have my flip-up rear sight on here because there's no reason to. I couldn't get to it. I even have a Samson Field Survivor in this gun. Pretty please, with sugar on top, can I get a RAM flip-to-side ACOG? Just make me one, I'll test it for you guys. I'll test repeatability out to 500. I need that in my life. Seriously, need. It's not a want, it's a need. I don't like not having iron sights on my rifle. That's kind of how much I like the RAM. I have a lot of confidence in it. I think that for scope rifles, it's one of the few systems that could be reliable enough to be flipped to side and still keep a zero. So my next product will be the Samson Evo M-Lock rail. It's a little bit different than the traditional Evo design, where it has a little bit of rail in the rear, or towards the rear. Rails up front, it's blanked out in the middle with M-Lock all the way around. So I guess I'm going to build another rifle. Sucks, but it's an excuse. I build another rifle and get a hold of Magpul and get some M-Lock kit and run it on that gun and see how well it stands up. I'm not a fan of key mod myself. Watched the key mod stuff fall off before, so see if I can knock some stuff off an M-Lock rail and see what happens. But search YouTube for the other Project X members, get their takes, get their reviews. Everybody's got a different style. And share the video, share it around, and that's the purpose of Project X. It's to get a core of individuals who will test, evaluate, and recommend, and make the products better. So we'll see you next time.